Y grabas tú, ¿verdad, Paloma?
Está grabando ya, Álvaro. Ya, pues está grabando ya, Álvaro.
Ah,
Y
que
a
está
las 5
grabando.
voy a empezar.
Ah, es verdad. Ah, sí, ahora que lo veo pone... Bueno, ya queda poco.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar organized by the Society of Spanish Researchers in South Africa and the Embassy of Spain in Pretoria. I'm Paloma de la Peña, and I'm going to be introducing this webinar and attending your questions as a member of the Spanish Society of Researchers. Today, the invited speaker is Dr. Irene ESTEBAN. Dr. ESTEBAN is a researcher at the Evolutionary Studies Institute at the University of Witwatersrand and a research fellow at the African Center for Coastal Paleoscience of Nelson Mandela University. Her interdisciplinary research concerns paleobotany and archaeology. She uses two microscopic techniques, phytoliths and infrared spectroscopy, to explore the interaction between human foraging behaviors and past environments through the Quaternary. She studies archaeological sites using these techniques to answer questions related to human behavior and pyrotechnology and its coupled response to climate and environmental change. Dr. ESTEBAN has an outstanding experience as a laboratory specialist and as a field archaeologist, both in Spain and in Southern Africa. She also holds an outstanding record of publications, even if she is still a junior researcher related to paleobotany and archaeology. She did her PhD in probably one of the most relevant sites for the Middle Stone Age in Southern Africa, Pinnacle Point, with an outstanding record and quality of publications. And I believe she's going to present today the results of a project that she's co-directing in Pondoland in Eastern Cape and funded by the National Science Foundation of the United States. Before we listen to her interesting presentation, there is also a small introduction by the Ambassador of Spain, Don Carlos Enrique Fernández Arias Minuesa. And let me remind you before I connect with the Ambassador that you can leave your question to Dr. ESTEBAN in the chat and that we will be addressing them after the talk. Please do not be shy and ask questions, and I hope you enjoy the talk.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us in the third and last webinar. Today, Ms. Dr. Irene ESTEBAN, postdoctoral fellow in archaeobotany and who currently works at the Evolutionary Studies Institute of the University of Witwatersrand and at the African Center of Coastal Paleoenvironments of the Nelson Mandela University, is going to talk about South African coastal occupation and foraging during the Last Pleistocene era and the early Holocene in Waterfall Bluff, Eastern Pondoland. Before closing this first series of webinar, I would like to thank the Spanish Scientist Association in South Africa and its members for the precious collaboration and for joining, and to all of you for joining during the last months. We are already working to offer you a new series of webinars that we hope will be of interest for all. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Paloma, for your introduction, and thank you to the ACE Society and the Embassy of Spain in Pretoria for inviting me today to talk about the research that my team, the P5, is conducting in Pondoland, Eastern Cape, South Africa. So coastlines are unique in that they provide natural buffers against the effects of localized resource instability triggered by climatic and environmental variability. This is because coastal zones often experience moderate climates and support diverse marine and terrestrial ecologies not found inland. Of particular interest for hunter-gatherers, coastlines could have provided access to predictable marine foods, including shellfish and marine fish, but also terrestrial plants and animal foods would have been also available in the surroundings. Climatic and environmental changes across the Pleistocene glacial and interglacial phases globally shifted the habitats and ultimately the availability of plant, animal, and freshwater resources on which hunter-gatherers depend. For hunter-gatherers, these habitat changes likely influence their annual and seasonal mobility and resource decision-making, as they could have impacted all aspects of their lives, redistributing resources exploited for food, wood fuel, medicines, utilitarian items, and all other daily activities. But one of the most extreme habitat changes at the end of the Pleistocene occurred during the period of maximum global ice volume that is known as the Last Glacial Maximum. The expansion of sea ice dropped sea levels by up to 125 meters below modern levels, and these lowered sea levels exposed large tracts of land on continental margins, as we can see in this imagery created by Eric Fisher, where we have in front of Pinnacle Point in Mossel Bay, Western Cape, an exposed new land that it could have been colonized by animals, vegetation, and of course, people. But unfortunately, all the archaeological records of hunter-gatherers on this continental shelf were largely destroyed by sea level rise at the onset of Termination 1, that is around 14,000 years ago, that is leading into the Holocene. And in Southern Africa, this has resulted in a nearly complete absence of records documenting coastal occupation and coastal resource use, dating to glacial periods and mainly to the LGM. And across Southern Africa, there are actually few places with narrow and steep continental margins that restrict coastline movements and that promote relative coastal stability. So one of these regions is the Pondoland, and as you can see in this slide, we have on the east coast of South Africa, the Pondoland, where the P5 project is based, and in the dark orange, that is part of the continental shelf. You can see the current borders of South Africa coastlines that is colored in the light yellowish orange. So all this dark orange part of the continental shelf was exposed during glacial maxima, and all of this, it could be new land. And of course, coastlines, it could be much farther away from what they are now. But as you can see in the Pondoland, this is not the case. And actually, marine trackers have shown that, for example, this ship was following the continental shelf break. What that means. So this picture, this photograph was taken from our site in Pondoland. And so that means that people, even during the last glacial maximum, would have been able to see the ocean from the site. So our project is focused on the Pondoland region in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. And this is because it has a narrow continental shelf. It has the Agulhas current providing a stable and moderating influence on local climates. It has a rich intertidal and areas and estuaries. It has abundant rivers and freshwater resources, a detailed ethnobotanical records of plants that can be detected archaeologically, and the last but not least, the region has coastal caves and rock shelters that preserve rich archaeological records. So the P5 project is an interdisciplinary and international collaboration of researchers focused on understanding human adaptations to coastal environments. The P5 project began in 2010 as an outgrowth of the SAC-P4 project and the Paleoscapes project. The project is based in Arizona State University, led by Dr. Eric Fisher, but it is now run in cooperation with Dr. Hayley Cathra from the South African Council for Geoscience, Dr. Justin Pargeter from New York University, and myself from Wits University. And as you can see here, the project, it's also, in this project also many other people collaborate. And as you can see, many of them are South African-based researchers. Others are South African researchers outside South Africa, or actually both things. Sorry, just a moment. So our project has a laboratorium that is based at the East London Museum, whose staff members have given us invaluable support, and we are very grateful to them, and especially to Kevin Cole, Principal Natural Scientist of the museum. So here at the lab, we store all the materials that are collected during excavations, but also the materials that are derived from other side projects that the P5 is running. And also in this lab, researchers come and visit the collections to study the collections and conduct all sorts of research activities. So our region is part of the Indian Ocean coastal belt biome, a center of biodiversity and plant endemism, especially with regards to trees, which constitutes an 800-kilometer long coastal strip from the South African border with Mozambique to the mouth of the Great Kai River, which is located a couple of kilometers north of East London. The current regional vegetation comprises a mosaic of sourveld grassland, bushveld, and different types of forests like coastal forest or scarp forest. And going a little bit back to the origins of the P5 project, in 2011, the P5 conducted an extensive ground survey of Eastern Pondoland and documented nearly 24 of open air and rock shelter sites with archaeological material. In 2015, the team returned to Pondoland to conduct test excavations at 4 of our highest priority sites. During 2015 and 2016, a mobile tented camp was used to house the team in the field, as you can see in this photo. The results from these 2 campaigns, 2015 and 16, were published by Eric Fisher in the South African Archaeological Bulletin. And here we are at 4 holes where we are excavating this site, C4NW8, near M10-2. So now that you see these long alphanumeric names, before any of you ask me why we were naming our sites like this, so here you have the image of how the methodology used for the excavation surveys was conducted. That it consisted in dividing our region, that we have it on the left map, into grid blocks. And each grid block was given an alphanumeric name, like A1, A2, A3. And then each of these blocks were further divided into 4 quadrants. This is northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. And then every new site discovered was given a number. And that is why, for example, in this site that is in one of the cliffs of the Mkweni River is named A3, from A3 grid, northwest quadrant, and this was the 8th site discovered. For example, in this site, we also discovered rock art. The 3rd site that we visited, it was B4 NW1 at MC Cava, where we found early Stone Age artifacts and MSA artifacts from the early Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, on exposed coastal Paleosoil. And this is Waterfall Bluff, our former A2SE1. Waterfall Bluff is located on the coast, where the Mlambonkulu River falls into the ocean in a 60-meter high waterfall. The rock shelter is 80 meters long and 20 meters deep, and it is located 24 meters above sea level. We have excavated in 2 areas of the site. This is the western excavation area and the eastern excavation area. But the bulk of our excavations occur on the western excavation area, as you can see here, where we have excavated a 4.5 long trench that starts at the drip line and goes into the shelter. So the excavations, the results of the excavations from 2016 and 2019 have been recently published in Quaternary Research by Fisher et al., where we present the stratigraphy and sedimentology of the sediments. We present the chronology of the site and preliminary results on the lithics, seashells, and fish remains. So during excavations, we plot all archaeological materials recovered. This includes fauna remains, charcoal, macrobotanics, lithics, seashells, and all sediment samples that are later used for to conduct all sort of analysis. And to date, we have plotted over 17,000 pieces of shell, stone, bone, and other anthropogenic remains. And as you can see here, this is a windmill. And this windmill, it gives the P5, the on-site excavations, to be run completely on green energy. And this is because of something very specific that I'm going to let Eric Fischer to explain to us. I hope you all could listen to this. So yeah, the Indian Ocean wind systems are pretty strong, and so this allows us to have green energy every day, practically on site. So as I was saying, we have recently published the chronology of the site, and we have mainly dated our 2 main sedimentological units that are practically dividing the glacial to the Holocene occupations. So the OSL dating was conducted by Rosa Sanctura and Zenobia Jacobs at the University of Wollongong. And the radiocarbon dating has been analyzed at the South African ESTEBAN labs. And it has shown that the deposits at Waterfall Bluff dated from around 37,000 years old, and this is during marine isotopes stage 3, to around 8,000 years ago during the Middle Holocene. But we haven't reached bedrock yet, so we hope to have much older deposits. Our co-PI and lithic specialist Justin Pargeter has conducted a preliminary study on the lithic material, and analysis will continue practically when 2020 is over and we are able to go back to the field. So in general terms, there is a general resemblance of the lithic industry from Waterfall Bluff to that observed in other inland sites. And this is also the case for some of the raw material. And together with the presence of mobile toolkits, all this suggests some sort of connection with larger areas and perhaps some connection of people occupying Waterfall Bluff and the coast to those people from the interior highlands. And perhaps we could even have the same people moving from the highlands to the coastlines and the same way back. And something quite interesting that Justin found is the presence of water-worn pebbles. And these water-worn pebbles are little pebbles that are normally attached to the mussels. And people at Waterfall Bluff, as we will see now, they were collecting many seashells, and probably these pebbles came along. This has been found in other sites, but what is very interesting is what we find at Waterfall Bluff, that is that people were napping actually these pebbles to create small little tools, small little blades. At Waterfall Bluff, we have also found very good preservation of organic material. For example, here we have a feather that we have found through 3 different locations in the Holocene deposits. Bone is also very well preserved and is currently under study by Jerome Reynard from Leeds University. And something that we found in the 2019 excavations last year, it was human remains. We discovered human teeth coming from deposits dating to the LGM, to the Last Glacial Maximum. These are actually one of the few remains, human remains dating from this time, from the LGM in Africa. The teeth is currently under study, but the importance of this finding is not only that they are human remains, but it's the fact that analysis of DNA or isotopes will enable us to better understand where these people came from, who these people were related to, and what they were eating. We have also found warped bone. And also perforated shells and beads from the Holocene deposits. Both work bone and all the perforated shells and beads come from the Holocene deposits. And we found lots of shellfish, mostly from the Holocene deposits where we have shell middens, but also from the glacial deposits, both MIS3 and LGM. The shellfish is studied by Antonieta Gerardino from UNISA, and she found that mainly most of the shells that these people were collecting at Waterfall Bluff, it was perna mussels, as this is the dominant species. And most interestingly, we found lots of fish bones. To date, we have found over 1,600 fragments of fish bone from both glacial and Holocene deposits. And these fish remains are studied by Edith Soar from the Oranim Academic College in Israel. So what is interesting at Waterfall Bluff is that both the presence of shellfish and fish bones is indicating us that people occupying Waterfall Bluff, occupying the Eastern Cape and the Pondoland region during the LGM were still foraging the coast. And now let me introduce you to the paleobotanical, the archaeobotanical and biochemical analysis that we have been conducting recently at Waterfall Bluff, because we have an amazing preservation of many different types of botanical remains that have been preserved in different forms, either by organic material, like the presence of preserved plant tissues, the preservation of pollen, but also the preservation of silicified plant remains, as these are phytoliths, the preservation of charred remains, and mainly charcoal, and also the preservation, the organic preservation of the leaf waxes that have allowed us to conduct a stable isotope analysis from carbon and hydrogen. So these are some of the species that have been found in the charcoal analysis that has been conducted by Marion Bamford and Alison House from the Evolutionary Studies Institute at BITS. So all the species that we found are showing us that the plants that people were collecting at Waterfall Bluff, they were collected because they were desirable to humans for three main reasons. The first reason is most of these species are actually hardwoods, and this type of wood, it makes good fires, so it's, let's say, good for drying. Some of these species also have medicinal properties, either from the leaves, the bark, or even the seeds, some of them. And another species, they also have fruits and berries that are edible. So therefore, probably either some of these species could be collected to make fire, or for medicinal purposes, or as food. And here we have an example of the preserved leaves that we found. These come from the Holocene deposits. Actually, the preserved leaves only come from the Holocene deposits. And in this, practically in the whole Holocene, we found a lot of these leaves. Unfortunately, when after excavations, they didn't preserve very well. They dried very quickly and fragmented, making impossible actually to reach very specific taxonomic levels. So we could only differentiate if they come from dicotyledonous plants, or they come from monocots, such as, for example, grasses, or it could be sedges. And in the same levels, in the phytolith study, we found a lot of phytoliths that are derived from the leaves of trees. And so we hypothesize that because we find many species that are actually that have medicinal properties, perhaps these people were collecting all these species, collecting wood together with leaves for perhaps medicinal purposes. In the Holocene deposits, we also found in the pollen record extreme high percentages of Artemisia pollen. And this is actually not very normal in many archaeological sites. And we hypothesize that because Artemisia is the most widely used medicinal plant in South Africa, that is used for treating tuberculosis and malaria, and a very wide range of illness such as cough or colds, or to treat fevers. So we hypothesize that perhaps all these extremely high concentrations of Artemisia pollen in our Holocene deposits could be indicating that people were collecting Artemisia and probably perhaps Artemisia afra for medicinal purposes. And this, it could be in line with what we find in the charcoal record. And something very important, although the charcoal analysis is still preliminary, and we have many samples that we collected in 2019 to be analyzed. They are awaiting for analysis. Of what we have now, we found evidences to make some implications on foraging strategies. And besides all the different properties that the plants that we found that we identify in the charcoal might have for medicine or for food, some of these species they are currently growing in coastal areas. And coastal species are found along the sequence from MIS3 to LGM deposits to the Holocene deposits. And therefore, we can hypothesize that people inhabiting Waterfall Bluff during both glacial and interglacial periods were still foraging the coast. So these evidences, together with the presence of fish bones and seashells in our glacial and interglacial deposits, strongly suggest that the people that inhabit were living at Waterfall Bluff were exploiting the coast, using the coast, even the coast was a little bit farther or was closer to the site. And more from a paleoenvironmental perspective, here we have the results. This is sort of a summary of the results from the carbon and the hydroxene isotopes, from the phytoliths and the pollen. And our results indicate that during the MIS3 and the LGM, we have probably low precipitation conditions and low rainfall seasonality, and they're probably quite cool conditions. So under these conditions, in terms of vegetation, we do have open woodlands interspersed with dry and hydrophilous grassland and bushveld vegetation, where there could be a good representation of fynbos elements. And all these landscapes could probably occur along Podocarpus afrocarpus forest. As you can see in the pollen diagram, we have very high concentrations of Podocarpus pollen in both MIS3 and LGM deposits. And so these deposits, these forests of Podocarpus could have been present either along the river valleys and scarps on the Pondoland exposed continental shelf, either towards the south and west of Waterfall Bluff. And these forests could be supported by paleo rivers and the cool temperatures that could have favored low evapotranspiration. However, as an alternative, the Podocarpus pollen could have derived from the interior regions or somewhere in the interior where pollen grains could have been transported to the site by intensified westerly winds. So in general, our proxy data shows that this forest, as you can see from the graph, at the end of the LGM, they contracted, and probably as a result of the post-glacial marine transgressions, or perhaps due to the southward displacement and reduced westerlies following the LGM. For the Holocene, we have a completely different record where the paleoenvironmental signals point to higher rainfall and higher summer seasonality. And these changes are coeval with an increase of coastal forest taxa and C4 mesic grasslands with localized wetland vegetation around Waterfall Bluff. But we are not only conducting archaeological research in the Pondoland. The P5 is also conducting modern vegetation sampling. We have been collecting since 2016 modern soils to be analyzed for phytoliths, pollen, and leaf waxes in order to create, to reconstruct a modern analog to be used for comparison with our archaeological records and fossil records. We have also been conducting ethnobotanical and ethnographic studies, and it has been mainly conducted by Jan de Vink from the Nelson Mandela University and Benerick van Beek from University of Johannesburg. We have also conducted strontium isoscape modeling. So we have been collecting soils for all over the region to construct these we call it isoscapes that are principally, the purpose of this is to investigate the paleoecology of terrestrial animal resources that were available to fisher hunter-gatherers across the study area. But we have also conducted intensive geological investigations led by our co-PI and geologist, Hayley Catherine. So to conclude, the lines of investigation of our team and preserved archaeological records from Pondoland provide an unprecedented opportunity to study fisher hunter-gatherer behavioral variability in a persistent coastal context across glacial and interglacial phases. Our project is generating evidence to test questions about resource variability across glacial and interglacial transitions and how these changes impacted hunter-gatherer subsystem practices, mobility patterns, and technological organization. We employ a multidisciplinary approach to answer these questions that include ethnographic studies, paleoenvironmental and paleoecological reconstructions, geochemical and geological analysis, besides archaeological excavations. But the most important is that at the P5, we have lots of fun. And before I finish this presentation, I wanted to introduce you to our new P5 website that has been created by Eric Fisher. And specifically, well, I welcome you all to come to visit the website. We have many different resources for you to have a look at, but today I wanted to introduce you to our virtual tours. So let's cross fingers that that this is going to work and that you all can have a look at this. So here we have virtual tours that allow you to come to the field while you are sitting at home, sitting at your desk. So yeah, you can come you can go all around practically the Pondoland, see how Pondoland looks like and what kind of research we do. You can see that you need a little bit of good hand to move this around. But these virtual tours are really, really, really cool. You can even be at the site and see how the waterfall looks like, how our excavations look like, what kind of research we conduct. So yeah, I hope you visit us and you enjoy. And now before finishing, I wanted to, sorry, I need to turn that off. Sorry. And before I finish, I also want to introduce you, for those of you who doesn't know, the B5 has created a new web series called Before Us. We have released already 4 episodes where we present parts of the research we are conducting in the Pondoland. And this week is going to be released our 4th episode. So I want to thank the Athens Society, the Embassy of Pretoria, of Spain in Pretoria. I also want to thank all the funding institutions, organizations, and all the people that has made possible and makes possible our research to be conducted. And also I want to thank all the people that is now at home and have been listening to my talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Irene. That was a fantastic talk. All the attendants, you can leave your questions if you want in the chat or in the question and answer section. We have one question of Charles Day. Do you have any estimate of human population density in the area during the research period?
Oh, that is a very good and difficult question to answer. Actually, is in the in the site we can see that probably we don't know the population, but the intensity of occupations were a little bit higher during the Holocene than during the glacial periods. But instead, in terms of how many people, we actually don't know. For the whole region, we have documented around 12 sites with archaeological material. Some of them are sites that probably were occupied very briefly, probably as people, groups were moving around, but no, that's quite difficult to answer. Hopefully one day.
There is another question. Can you tell the approximate population size of people staying there from the evidence that digging?
So I think I half answered that question. From the archaeological evidence, what we have is we can see we don't know how many people, but at least it seems that the occupations were a little bit more intense during the Holocene, that not the glacials. But in terms of how many people, we know from ethnographic studies that hunter-gatherer groups normally are around 15, 20, 25 people. I don't think at the site groups of bigger than 20, 30 people could be living in the cave as a based camp.
Another question from Ruby and Irene. Hi, thank you for the talk. I was wondering if you could discuss the chronology a bit more. It's remarkable number of dates that you have obtained. Indeed, I would say so. It's remarkable number of dates. Can you comment more on the chronology and the dating?
Well, I'm not a chronologist, of course, but so yeah, we have collected many samples, not only for OSL dating, but also the ITEMBA labs have conducted, have been running a lot of samples for radiocarbon dating. And as you could see from the figure that I was showing, this has been published in our paper, Fisher et al. This year in Quaternary Research. So I welcome all of you to go and have a look at the paper, where all the chronology, methodology, and results are well explained. But what we see is occupations practically continuous, as you could see. Of course, when we say continuous in archaeology, it doesn't mean that every day, one after the other, people were occupying the cave. But we have practically a continuous occupation from around 37,000 years ago to around the middle Holocene. For the Holocene period, that is, we have the radiocarbon dating, the model. This model practically gives range between around, let's say, roughly 13,000 to 10,500 years ago. But we can't differentiate further in between levels, in between the different samples collected from the Holocene deposits. But this, I believe, it can be solved with the development of new baselines. But sorry, my vocabulary in chronology is not the best. But I hope I kind of answered your question. But again, I welcome you all to come and read our paper.
Now you have, Irene, some questions about the human remains. Could the teeth possibly be a milk teeth?
No.
Lost from young children, suggesting
No.
family group? And
No.
a related question to that, are they adults or children? Are there modern human beings, they are asking?
So the teeth is currently under study, but the preliminary studies are telling us, so these studies are being conducted at the New York University. And the very preliminary results that we are getting from the teeth, that is practically just to looking at the teeth, right? To look at the shape and how it looks like, the preservation. So probably we can say that these are not children, and perhaps it could be some sort of, at least from teenager to adult. And what was the other question? Are they modern humans? Yes, they are modern humans.
Also, Iwasi Kuzwayo is asking, did you do any work in Mkambati Nature Reserve in Pondoland?
Yes, so one of the sites that maybe now I'm not going to remember the name, I think is B4 Northwest 1. This site is inside the Mkambati Nature Reserve. And these are the, maybe you remember by the photograph with the coastal paleosoils. So yes, we've been conducting a lot of research in the Mkambati. We found this early Stone Age and Middle Stone Age site. And we have also in the Mkambati, actually, when I was telling you about all the modern vegetation studies that we are conducting, most of them come from the Mkambati Nature Reserve. And actually, this photograph of this house is inside the Mkambati.
You have another question from Rob Guest. Have you considering its insect repellent qualities, including against fleas, that the large amount of Artemisia may have been as a result of it being used in bedding? I suppose you like the question.
So actually, we have not. And that's actually very interesting. Thank you for pointing that out. But yeah, we didn't. Because Artemisia, and specifically Artemisia afra, is such a widely medicinal plant used in South Africa. And to the best of my knowledge, I didn't know it was also used against fleas. So that's very interesting. And well, that could be actually implying some sort of perhaps bedding at the site. That on the phytoliths, I can't see it, but who knows? That is good to know. Thank you.
Rest of the questions that I see. Will you be doing research at Solobeni anytime in the future? Probably I'm pronouncing it wrong with my thick Spanish.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a click. I don't think so, Paloma. But we are aware of Holocene, and we have been in contact with the people involved in this project. And yeah, it's there. It's one of the things that the P5 wants to be involved with, and in the future, when everything comes back to normal and we start keeping track on stuff and research that we were conducting before the pandemic. But yeah, we are in touch with the East London Museum and actually the people involved in the Holocene.
Have more questions for now, but I'm going to ask you something. As I'm also an archaeologist, I'm curious, which is the closest nearest site, not in the coast, with the same chronology of this area, so that you could compare for this time period?
So mainly, not at the coast, is Grass Ridge. That actually this year they published a paper recently. So Grass Ridge, I think, is the closest, but it's around almost 200 kilometers, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because Grass Ridge is in the grassland biome, no? It's quite inland.
It's inland. It's before the highlands, but yeah, it's in the high grasslands. But yeah, that would be the closest of archaeological sites. I know there are some sites in around East London that actually people from Leeds University are working on. So I'm sure we will be able to compare our results with all these different research.
I have more questions because I see that there are no more questions. So I'm going to ask you a more technical question. I've seen that in your paleoenvironmental reconstruction, you have used leaf wax. I don't know if I'm pronouncing well.
Leaf waxes,
I would like you to further explain to people like me that we don't really know well these techniques, how that evidence complements the other evidence related to plant, like pollen or charcoal and so on, and what type of new information or not can bring those type of remains.
So from the leaf waxes, we can conduct, or at least that's what the type of stable isotope analysis that we have conducted is carbon isotopes and hydroxene isotopes. So from the carbon isotopes, we can obtain the delta carbon 13 of these isotopes, and we can see if there is a predominance in the region, or in this case, in an archaeological site, it could be representing more the local environments and probably of those plants that people were collecting and bringing in the rock shelter. So it gives you an idea of the proportion of C3 and C4 plants. So we have to keep in mind that most of our C3 plants are our trees, our bushes, all this type of vegetation. And our C4 plants are mostly our C4 grasses that actually in the Pondoland are the dominant grasses. But also we have palms are C4, although I'm not sure how much they can contribute in an ecosystem, in an environment like the one in the Pondoland. But also they are also C4 sedges, so Cyperaceae. So yeah, so it gives you a proportion of how much C3 or C4, and people normally uses it to see how open or how close your environments are. And then the hydroxene isotopes, it gives you the hydrology history of the site. And in this case, is more general, more than general, it's more regional, the picture that is giving you. And depending the type of isotope, you can study different ones. But in general, it gives you an idea of the precipitation of the region, and that is why I was when I was giving the signal that all our proxies were giving us, I was commenting that in the glacials we have low precipitation and lower seasonality. Because sometimes lower precipitation is not always straightforward to seasons. So, and in South Africa, this is important because we have like two main rainfall regions, one in the winter, the west in the Cape, summer rainfall in the east. But we know that along the Pleistocene, there's been movements of rainfall seasonality. So yeah, both together can give you a general idea of the environment. And together with the pollen, together with the phytoliths, the charcoal, imagine you can have a very complicated, but a very good idea of what your environments could be looking like.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know that. And I have another question, Irene. Regarding the strontium soil project that you were mentioning at the end, that's to see modern soil, or you are also doing test pits and doing analysis to try to assess deposits in the past? How does it go exactly?
So, I mean, I don't know too much about it, right? And I might be wrong. But in general, the idea is when we collect soils, and actually you can also collect plants, and you study the strontium isotopes. And you study this to have as a baseline, right? To know what kind of different soils from different, what kind of values the strontium isotopes have. The same for the plants. So we know the plants are growing in subsoils, right? And they are growing on the soils, and in the subsoils, these soils have the sediments that are eroded from our bedrocks, right? So it actually also has some strontium isotopes. And then our animals, mostly our herbivores, they eat plants, right? And when they eat these plants, they also absorb the strontium isotopes. So when you study the strontium isotopes, if I'm not mistaken, from faunal remains, you can have these values and be compared afterwards what we have in our regions. And that is why we call it isoscape, because it's like a landscape of isotopes. From our region, we know.
So it would be a comparison between the archaeological remains and the modern soil.
Yes. So it's kind of like a baseline. I guess they have different, let's call it filters, because of course, I mean, probably it's not the same amount of isotopes, let's say. I don't think that is correct, but I mean, the values that are represented in the bones, probably they lose the animals, they lose some of this concentration of isotopes in comparison to the soils. But I guess there are modern studies. You can study probably fauna from modern fauna after they died. So you can study the isotopes from the bones of modern animals and compare with what you find on the soils, and of course then do an inference from your fossil record.
That's very informative. And I think with this, this is it. Thank you very much again for doing this presentation. This was the last webinar organized by the Society. I believe that the Society, we are going to organize other webinars in other scientific topics, but they are still not announced. Thank you everybody for joining us, and most of all, thank you to Irene for her time and for her wonderful presentation. It has been amazing. And bye-bye to everyone.
Thank you, Paloma. Thank you, Ate, and thank you, everyone.